The person you love wants to tell you something very important right now. Please read this message immediately. My beloved friend, don't skip. Stay until the very end, because this is not a prediction about your life or a real message from someone you know. It is a fictional story about love, regret, courage, and the life-changing power of honest communication. Sometimes the words that matter most are the ones left unsaid for the longest time. Some hearts remain silent not because they have nothing to say, but because they fear that speaking the truth might change everything forever. Yet there comes a moment when silence becomes heavier than honesty. This story begins on one of those unforgettable nights. The rain had been falling for hours, turning the city streets into shimmering reflections of streetlights and passing cars. Inside a small apartment, someone sat alone beside a window, holding a phone they had picked up and put down more times than they could count. The screen glowed softly in the darkness, displaying your name at the top of an unfinished message. They had rewritten the words dozens of times. Every version felt either too weak or too overwhelming. Every attempt ended with the same hesitation. They weren't afraid because they lacked feelings. They were afraid because those feelings had become impossible to hide any longer. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. Earlier that day they had stumbled across an old photograph tucked inside the pages of a forgotten book. It captured a simple moment, a shared laugh, warm afternoon sunlight, and two people who had no idea how much their lives would eventually change. Looking at that picture reminded them of something they had spent far too long ignoring. Time keeps moving, whether hearts are ready or not. Waiting for the perfect moment often means missing the moments that matter most. For the first time, they admitted to themselves that if they remained silent any longer, they might lose the opportunity to speak from the heart forever. They closed the book gently and walked outside despite the rain. The cool evening air cleared their thoughts as they wandered through familiar streets filled with memories. Every corner reminded them of conversations, quiet smiles, shared dreams, and the countless ordinary moments that had become extraordinary simply because they were experienced together. They realized love is rarely built through grand gestures alone. It grows through small acts of kindness repeated over time, through patient listening, shared laughter, forgiveness after misunderstandings, and the willingness to remain present when life becomes difficult. Something huge was waiting in this story. That evening they visited a quiet cafe where the two of you had once spent hours talking about everything from childhood memories to impossible dreams. The same table near the window was empty. Sitting there alone, they ordered 2 cups of coffee without thinking, smiling sadly when they noticed the second cup had no one to claim it. They remembered the way you always laughed before taking the first sip, the thoughtful pauses before answering difficult questions, and the habit of noticing beauty in ordinary things that everyone else overlooked. Those memories no longer felt distant. They felt like invitations to stop living in fear. Stay until the very end, because the most important message had not yet been spoken. Returning home, they finally opened a blank page in an old journal instead of another text message. If I can't say this perfectly, they whispered to themselves, I'll say it honestly. They began writing without stopping. Every sentence carried a truth they had hidden for far too long. They wrote about moments they wished they had appreciated more, apologies they should have spoken sooner, gratitude they had forgotten to express, and hopes they still quietly carried for the future. By the time they reached the final page, tears blurred the ink, yet their heart felt lighter than it had in years. The following morning arrived with clear skies after the storm. Sunlight streamed through the windows as birds welcomed the new day. Looking at the finished letter resting on the table, they smiled softly. It wasn't perfect. Some sentences were crossed out. Others were written in trembling handwriting. Yet every word was genuine. For the first time, they understood that authenticity matters far more than flawless expression. A sincere heart never needs perfect grammar to be understood. That afternoon they sent you a simple message: if you have a little time today, I'd like to see you. There's something I've wanted to tell you for a very long time. They didn't know how you would respond. They couldn't predict the future or control the outcome. But they had finally chosen courage over fear. Whatever happened next, they knew they would no longer wonder, what if I had simply told the truth? As the hours passed, they sat quietly in the park where you had once watched the sunset together. The breeze gently moved through the trees while children laughed in the distance. Every passing minute felt longer than the last. Yet beneath the nervousness was a new kind of peace. They had already taken the hardest step, the decision to stop hiding. Everything that followed would be built on honesty rather than assumptions. Then, just as the golden light of evening settled across the park, they looked up and saw someone walking toward them in the distance. Their heartbeat quickened. Their hands trembled slightly. The carefully folded letter rested safely in their pocket. Taking one deep breath, they quietly smiled, knowing that the next few moments would become the beginning of a conversation capable of changing both of their lives forever. The evening breeze gently moved through the trees as the golden light slowly faded into shades of amber and violet. My beloved friend, don't skip. Stay until the very end, because the conversation about to unfold would become one neither of you would ever forget. Every heartbeat seemed louder than the one before as they watched you walk closer across the quiet park. For weeks they had imagined this moment 100 different ways. Sometimes they pictured themselves speaking with confidence. Other times they imagined turning around and walking away before you ever arrived. Yet now there was nowhere left to hide. The truth had waited long enough. As you reached the bench beneath the old maple tree, you noticed something different about them. Their usual smile was there, but it carried a quiet nervousness you had never seen before. They stood for a moment without speaking, almost as though they were searching for words that refused to come. Finally, after taking one slow breath, they quietly said, "Thank you for coming." Their voice was soft, almost uncertain, but there was something beautifully sincere about it. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't perfect. It was simply honest. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. They slowly removed the folded letter from their jacket pocket and looked down at it for a long moment. I wrote this because I was afraid that if I tried to say everything aloud, fear would interrupt me before I finished. They smiled gently. But now that you're here, I don't think I want to read it anymore. I think I'd rather tell you with my own words. Carefully folding the letter again, they placed it beside them on the bench. In that simple gesture, they chose vulnerability over preparation, authenticity over perfection. For several quiet moments, they simply looked toward the horizon where the last rays of sunlight touched the lake. "I've spent so much time worrying about saying the wrong thing," they admitted. "I forgot that silence can hurt even more than imperfect words." They laughed softly at themselves before continuing. "There were so many times I wanted to tell you how much your kindness mattered to me. I wanted to thank you for believing in me during days when I couldn't believe in myself. I wanted to tell you that some of the happiest memories I've ever carried were the ordinary moments we shared together." Their eyes became misty. "Instead, I convinced myself there would always be another day." You listened without interrupting. The quiet around you seemed to encourage every honest sentence. The gentle sound of birds settling into the trees blended with the distant ripple of water against the shore. It felt as though nature itself had slowed down to make room for the conversation neither heart wanted to rush. Looking at them, you realized this wasn't simply someone confessing affection. This was someone finally allowing another person to see every part of who they truly were. Something huge was waiting in this story. They smiled faintly before continuing. "Do you know what frightened me the most?" You quietly shook your head. "It wasn't rejection. It was the possibility that I would never tell you how deeply your presence changed my life." They paused, searching for the right words. "Before I met you, I believed people only stayed as long as life remained easy. You quietly showed me something different. You stayed during awkward conversations. You stayed through misunderstandings. You stayed when I wasn't at my best. Without even realizing it, you taught me that genuine care isn't measured by perfect days. It's measured by faithful presence. Stay until the very end, because another truth was about to emerge." Reaching into their bag, they carefully removed the old photograph they had discovered the night before. Handing it to you, they smiled warmly. "When I found this picture yesterday, I remembered something I'd forgotten. We weren't smiling because life was perfect. We were smiling because we felt completely ourselves." Looking at the photograph together, both of you laughed at old hairstyles, familiar places, and memories that time had softened but never erased. Somehow, that simple picture reminded both of you that the strongest relationships are often built through countless ordinary moments rather than one extraordinary event. The sky gradually filled with stars as evening settled over the park. Streetlights reflected gently across the calm water while the world around you became wonderfully quiet. They looked at you once more before saying, "I don't know exactly what tomorrow looks like. I can't promise that life will always be simple. But I can promise something I've never been brave enough to promise before. I'll never allow fear to stop me from being honest with you again. If something matters, I'll say it. If I'm struggling, I'll tell you. If I'm grateful, I'll never leave those words unspoken." A peaceful silence followed. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty anymore. It was the silence that comes when two hearts finally understand one another without needing endless explanations. The folded letter remained unopened beside them. Neither of you reached for it. Somehow it had already served its purpose. It had given them enough courage to begin speaking from the heart. As the moon slowly rose above the lake, both of you stood and began walking together along the quiet path. Neither realized that the most meaningful chapter of your story wasn't hidden inside the letter at all. It was beginning with every honest conversation you chose to have from this moment forward. And somewhere just beyond the next sunrise, another unexpected moment was waiting, one that would reveal that the greatest messages are not always written on paper. Sometimes they are lived, one truthful day at a time. My beloved friend, don't skip. Stay until the very end, because although the letter remained folded inside their pocket, the most important words had only just begun to find their way into the open. The moon reflected across the quiet lake as both of you walked slowly along the winding path. Neither of you felt the need to hurry. Some conversations deserve time. Some emotions need silence between the sentences so the heart can understand what the mind has struggled to explain for so long. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, and with every step, it seemed as though another layer of fear quietly disappeared. For several minutes neither of you spoke. The peaceful silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt safe. Finally, they smiled gently and said, "There was a time when I thought love meant always saying the right thing. I spent so many years trying to become someone impressive enough that I forgot how to simply become myself." They laughed softly, shaking their head. "It's strange. The harder I tried to appear fearless, the lonelier I became. I built walls so carefully that eventually I couldn't remember how to open the gate. Listen carefully, because this changes everything." You stopped walking beside a quiet wooden pier that stretched over the still water. Looking across the lake, you quietly asked, "When did you first realize you wanted to tell me all of this?" They took a long breath before answering. Not during some dramatic moment. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Their eyes filled with quiet warmth as they remembered. You were helping an elderly man carry heavy grocery bags to his car. You didn't know anyone was watching. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You simply saw someone who needed kindness, and you helped without expecting anything in return. That was the moment I understood something important. Your character was the same whether people noticed or not. And I realized I wanted that kind of honesty in my own life. The memory settled gently between you. It wasn't a grand declaration of romance. It was something even more meaningful. It was admiration built on quiet moments that often go unseen. They continued, "From that day forward, I began noticing all the little things. The way you listened before speaking. The way you remembered details everyone else forgot. The way you encouraged people without making them feel small. I kept thinking to myself, one day I have to tell them how much these ordinary moments changed me. But every time I tried, fear convinced me to wait. Something huge was waiting in this story." Reaching into their pocket once again, they unfolded the letter that had remained unread all evening. Instead of handing it to you, they carefully tore away the first page. You looked at them in surprise. Smiling through tears, they explained, "The first pages were written by someone who believed fear should make every decision. They don't belong to me anymore." Then they unfolded the final page. "This one does." Their voice trembled slightly as they began reading aloud. "If you're hearing these words, it means I finally found the courage I spent years searching for. I don't expect life to become perfect. I don't expect every question to disappear overnight. I simply want you to know that meeting you reminded me that kindness still exists, that patience still matters, and that honest hearts are still worth believing in. Whether our paths continue side by side or someday lead in different directions, I will always be grateful that you helped me become someone who no longer hides behind fear. By the time they reached the final sentence, tears quietly filled both of your eyes. There was nothing dramatic about the moment. No applause. No extraordinary coincidence. Only truth spoken without disguise. Somehow that simple honesty carried more beauty than any perfect speech ever could. Stay until the very end, because another unforgettable chapter was beginning. The following morning, before sunrise, both of you returned to the same lakeside path. Mist floated gently above the water while the first rays of sunlight slowly brightened the horizon. Watching the new day begin, they smiled and whispered, "Last night I thought I was finally telling you everything. But I realized something on the way home." Curious, you turned toward them. "What is it?" you asked. They smiled with peaceful confidence. "I wasn't really trying to tell you how much you changed my life." They paused as the golden sunlight reflected across the lake. "I was trying to thank you." The words lingered in the quiet morning air. "Thank you for showing me that being understood begins with being honest. Thank you for reminding me that courage grows one truthful conversation at a time. Thank you for proving that the strongest relationships are not built by pretending to be perfect, but by choosing to be real." Neither of you spoke after that. There was nothing left to explain. Every hidden feeling had finally found its voice. Every fear had slowly surrendered to trust. Every ordinary moment you had shared together now carried new meaning. As the sun climbed higher into the morning sky, both of you continued walking side by side, quietly realizing that the message they had wanted to share all along had never been about changing the future. It had been about appreciating the present before another precious moment slipped away. And somewhere beyond the horizon, another beautiful chapter was already waiting. Not because destiny had written it, but because two people had finally chosen to write it together with honesty, kindness, patience, and hope. My beloved friend, don't skip. Stay until the very end, because after that unforgettable sunrise by the lake, neither of you realized another life-changing conversation was quietly waiting around the corner. The days that followed were filled with a different kind of peace. There were no dramatic declarations, no impossible promises, and no perfect fairy tale moments. Instead, there were long conversations that lasted until midnight, unexpected laughter over forgotten memories, quiet walks through familiar streets, and comfortable silences that no longer needed to be filled with nervous words. Every ordinary moment became another reminder that the strongest connections are built through consistency rather than grand gestures. One evening, while organizing a shelf filled with old books and photographs, they discovered something they hadn't seen in years: a small music box tucked inside a wooden drawer. Dust covered its delicate carvings, yet when they gently turned the tiny key, a soft melody filled the room. Instantly they were transported back to childhood, to days when life felt simpler and hope seemed effortless. Holding the music box in their hands, they smiled through quiet tears. "I almost forgot this existed," they whispered. It wasn't just an old keepsake. It was a reminder that even beautiful memories sometimes wait patiently until the heart is ready to receive them again. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. The following afternoon they asked if you would meet them once more, this time at the old botanical garden where colorful flowers stretched across winding paths beneath towering trees. As you arrived, they handed you the little music box without saying a word. Curious, you carefully opened it and listened to the gentle melody. "Do you know why I wanted you to have this?" they asked. You quietly shook your head. They smiled warmly before answering, "Because for a long time I believed my happiest memories belonged only in the past. Now I've realized something different. The future deserves beautiful memories too." Those simple words settled gently into your heart. You walked together through the peaceful garden, stopping occasionally to admire flowers blooming in every direction. Neither of you spoke for several minutes. The silence felt meaningful rather than empty. Finally, they admitted something that had remained hidden even after all the conversations you had already shared. "There's another reason I wanted to see you today," they said softly. "Not because I'm afraid anymore, but because I finally understand something I never understood before." Something huge was waiting in this story. They guided you toward the same wooden bench where years earlier they had once sat alone, convinced no one would ever understand them completely. Looking at the bench now, they smiled. "I used to come here whenever life became overwhelming," they explained. "Back then I thought being alone would protect me from disappointment. I convinced myself that if I never depended on anyone, I could never be hurt again." Their eyes slowly lifted toward yours. "But isolation didn't protect my heart. It only kept it lonely." You remained quietly beside them, allowing every word to unfold naturally. They continued, "Meeting you didn't suddenly erase every fear I carried. What changed was something much deeper. You showed me that trust isn't built because someone promises never to disappoint you. It's built because both people choose honesty even when conversations become difficult." Their voice grew steadier with every sentence. "That's what I want us to protect more than anything else. Not perfection. Not unrealistic expectations. Just honesty. Stay until the very end, because another unforgettable moment was quietly approaching." As the afternoon sunlight filtered through the tall trees, they reached into their pocket and unfolded the same letter they had almost given you weeks before. Smiling gently, they tore away another page and let the breeze carry it into a nearby recycling bin. Laughing softly at your surprised expression, they explained, "Every page I remove belongs to the version of me that believed fear deserved the final word. I don't need those pages anymore. Only one page remained." They carefully folded it and placed it into your hand. "I don't want you to read it today," they whispered. You looked at them curiously. "I want you to open it 1 year from now." "Why?" you asked. They smiled with peaceful confidence. "Because by then I hope you'll discover that the most important message inside isn't about what I felt yesterday." They paused as a gentle breeze moved through the garden. "It's about the life we're choosing to build every single day from this moment forward." Those words lingered beneath the quiet afternoon sky. The flowers swayed gently around you while sunlight painted soft patterns across the winding paths. Neither of you realized that the unopened letter would become more than a keepsake. It would become a reminder that the strongest relationships are not sustained by one extraordinary confession, but by hundreds of ordinary conversations filled with kindness, patience, forgiveness, and truth. And somewhere beyond the changing seasons, another beautiful chapter was already waiting, one that neither of you would have to face alone. The message that changed two hearts forever. ***. My beloved friend, don't skip. Stay until the very end, because every step of this fictional story has been leading to this moment. The late-night letter, the quiet walks, the honest conversations, the fears that were finally spoken aloud, and the courage to remain present through uncertainty were never separate chapters. They were all pieces of one beautiful journey. Sometimes the message we believe we need to hear is not a sentence written on paper. Sometimes it is a life patiently lived beside someone who chooses honesty over pride, compassion over judgment, and hope over fear. The seasons quietly changed. Spring became summer, summer slowly welcomed autumn, and the world continued moving with its familiar rhythm. Yet something within both of you had changed forever. The conversations never stopped. They became deeper. The laughter became more natural. The silence became more comfortable. Neither of you felt the need to impress the other anymore. Masks had disappeared. Expectations had softened. What remained was something neither of you had expected to find, a friendship so genuine that it became the strongest foundation love could ever stand upon. Listen carefully, because this changes everything. Exactly 1 year after that afternoon in the botanical garden, you returned together to the same wooden bench beneath the tall trees. The flowers were blooming once again, almost exactly as they had been 12 months earlier. The breeze carried the same peaceful fragrance, and birds filled the morning with joyful songs. Smiling, they reminded you of the folded letter resting safely inside the drawer where you had promised to keep it untouched. Today, they whispered gently, is the day you finally open it. With slightly trembling hands, you unfolded the carefully preserved page. Time had softened the edges, but the handwriting remained clear. There were no dramatic confessions waiting inside. No impossible promises. No predictions about the future. Instead, the letter simply said, "If you're reading this today, then we have already shared another year of conversations, ordinary mornings, unexpected laughter, difficult moments, forgiveness, patience, and countless memories that no letter could ever fully describe." When I first wrote these words, I believed this page would contain the most important message I could ever give you. I was wrong. The real message was never hidden in ink. It was hidden inside every day we chose kindness instead of anger, honesty instead of silence, understanding instead of assumptions, and gratitude instead of fear. If life has taught me anything, it is this: the greatest gift one heart can give another is not perfection. It is consistency. Thank you for staying when honesty felt uncomfortable. Thank you for listening before speaking. Thank you for reminding me that being loved does not require pretending to be someone else. Whatever tomorrow brings, I hope we always choose truth, compassion, and courage over fear. As you reached the final line, your eyes quietly filled with tears. Looking up from the letter, you smiled. Not because every challenge had disappeared, but because you understood what they had been trying to tell you from the very beginning. The most important message had never been a single conversation. It had been the way they continued showing up, day after day, through ordinary moments that slowly built extraordinary trust. Stay until the very end, because the story still held one final surprise. Reaching into their pocket, they placed a small, empty notebook into your hands. The cover was simple, with no title written across it. Confused, you looked at them and asked, "Why is every page blank?" They smiled with quiet joy before answering, "Because the next chapter shouldn't be written by fear, regret, or old memories. It should be written by us." Those words settled gently into the peaceful morning air. Without saying another sentence, both of you opened the notebook together. On the very first page, you each wrote one promise. Not a promise of a perfect future, but a promise of how you wanted to face whatever life might bring. You wrote, "I will choose understanding before judgment." They wrote, "I will choose honesty before silence." Looking at those simple sentences, both of you laughed softly. They weren't grand declarations. They were ordinary commitments. Yet together they carried enough strength to guide an entire lifetime. As the golden sunlight filtered through the trees, you closed the notebook and continued walking side by side along the winding garden path. There were still dreams to chase, challenges to overcome, mistakes to learn from, and new memories waiting to be created. But neither of you feared the unknown anymore. You had discovered something far more valuable than certainty. You had discovered trust. The old letter was carefully folded once again and placed inside the notebook. Not as a reminder of the past, but as a reminder of how far two honest hearts had traveled together. Every fear that once seemed impossible to overcome had become another step toward wisdom. Every tear had quietly watered the roots of compassion. Every difficult conversation had strengthened a bond that could never have been built through silence alone. As evening slowly painted the sky with shades of gold, lavender, and deep blue, the two of you paused one last time at the garden gate. Looking back at the path you had walked together, you realized something beautiful. Love was never about finding someone who could promise a life without storms. It was about finding someone willing to walk beside you when the rain began, to celebrate with you when the sun returned, and to keep choosing kindness through every changing season. The wind gently carried the scent of blooming flowers as you both stepped forward into tomorrow. Not with fear of what might happen, but with gratitude for everything that had already been shared. And somewhere beyond the horizon, countless unwritten pages waited patiently to be filled with ordinary moments that would one day become extraordinary memories. The greatest message wasn't hidden inside a letter. It was written every day through patience, honesty, forgiveness, and love. Some words are spoken once. But true love is written in the quiet choices we make for each other, again and again.